The Chinese regime has been claiming no new virus cases in the epicenter for the past 25 days, but local residential notices say otherwise. China state media slandering U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo again. Pompeo responds. One of the most prominent officials in the Czech Republic died suddenly before a planned visit to Taiwan. His family suspects pressure from Beijing led to his death. Intelligence agencies are currently investigating two Chinese scientists linked to the Wuhan lab. They previously studied live bats in Australia. And Amazon is raising red flags by using high-tech security cameras from a Chinese firm blacklisted in the U.S. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The CCP is continuing to cover up the outbreak in China. An announcement from a residential block in Wuhan dated April 28th says one resident tested positive on that date and a family member is now quarantined. It says all residents must stay home and can only go out once every 3 days. But according to the Chinese CDC, there were no new cases on April 28th, and there are no confirmed cases at all right now in the whole of Hubei province. Wuhan is the capital of Hubei. According to Chinese media, there have been no new confirmed cases in Hubei province, the worst hit province in China for the past 25 days. But people outside Hubei don't seem to believe it. Hubei citizens have difficulty finding a job in other provinces. Many of them have had to go back home. An April 28th video from a southern Chinese coastal city shows many people waiting for a bus. The person taking the video says there are over 1,000 people here. They're going back to Hubei. Now to the Chinese regime's propaganda war. After calling U.S. Secretary Mike Pompeo the enemy of humankind, the Chinese regime's mouthpiece, CCTV, again on April 28th slandered Pompeo for committing 4 so-called sins.
瑞平指出，在美国历史上，从没见过像蓬佩奥这样的国务卿，硬是把在中情局期间撒谎、欺骗、偷窃那一套带到美国外交场合，断崖式拉低了美国的声望。此次新冠肺炎疫情发生以来，蓬佩奥变本加厉，其所作所为已经突破做人的底线。
CCTV said Pompeo's so-called 4 sins are 1. Cutting off money for the World Health Organization, 2. Accusing China of being the origin of the virus, thus provoking hatred, 3. Continuing to sanction Iran and Cuba, and 4. Doing nothing to combat the virus in the U.S. and ignoring the lives of American people. CCTV concluded Pompeo has lost the trust of the American people and has become America's great shame. In an interview with Fox News on April 28th, Pompeo responded that people know what communists do.
This is classic communist disinformation.
This is what he recently said about the virus and the Chinese Communist regime.
We strongly believe that the Chinese Communist Party did not report the outbreak of the new coronavirus in a timely fashion to the World Health Organization. China didn't share all of the information it had. Instead, it covered up how dangerous the disease is. The world hasn't gained access to the WIV, the Virology Institute there. We don't know precisely where this virus originated from. And we don't know if they are operating at a level of security to prevent this from happening again.
One netizen wrote, the CCP's criticism of Pompeo is completely different from his criticism of the CCP. Pompeo talked about facts, what happened and what is still happening. He only gave warnings and did not carry out any personal attacks. A so-called great country with a civilization of 5,000 years, which calls itself the land of propriety, actually disgusts the world. This is because the CCP destroyed the Chinese civilization, and now this hooligan and rabid dog is the ruler. Chinese authorities have arrested citizens who are preserving digital records of the virus outbreak. According to American media courts, a Beijing man and his girlfriend were arrested on April 19th for, quote, provoking trouble. They belong to a project called Terminus 2049. A few days later, 2 brothers involved in the same project were also arrested. Intelligence agencies are investigating whether or not the virus leaked from a lab in Wuhan. The Five Eyes intelligence agencies, which include Australia, the US, Canada, the UK, and New Zealand, is investigating 2 Chinese scientists linked to the Wuhan lab. According to reports, the 2 scientists had previously studied live bats in Australia. The 2 scientists, Xi Zhenli and Zhou Peng, specialized in emerging viruses in wildlife, particularly those in rodents and bats. According to the documentary tracking down the origin of Wuhan coronavirus by NTD and Epoch Times senior investigative reporter Joshua Phillip, Xi Zhenli has been focusing her research on coronaviruses since the SARS outbreak in 2003. Particularly, her team's research in the Wuhan lab focused on how the coronaviruses can be transmissible to humans.
Since the SARS outbreak in 2003, Xi Zhenli has been conducting research on coronaviruses. From 2010 onward, the focus of Xi and her team was redirected to identifying the capacity for coronavirus transmission across species, specifically putting the spotlight on the S protein of the coronaviruses. In other words, her team's research in the Wuhan lab has been looking into the part that can make coronaviruses transmittable to humans.
Xi has been dubbed China's Batwoman by her colleagues because of the time she spent in bat caves hunting down viruses. That's according to an interview published in Scientific American last month. Xi and Zhou co-authored a research paper in Nature linking the novel coronavirus to bats. According to their research, the novel coronavirus gene sequence was 96% identical to a bat coronavirus. The Argentine federal court received a criminal complaint on April 23rd, calling for the Chinese regime to be tried for bioterrorism and genocide over the virus. Argentine lawyer Alejandro Sanchez Caldermaten filed a lawsuit in criminal court on April 16th, calling for a criminal investigation into the origins of the virus and calling the resulting crisis genocide, crimes against humanity. It's the first criminal lawsuit against the Chinese regime over the virus. One of the most influential officials in the Czech Republic suddenly died earlier this year before a planned visit to Taiwan. His widow linked his death to pressure from Czech and Chinese authorities. Jaroslav Kubera was the chairman of the upper house of the Czech parliament. He's the most senior official after President Miloš Zeman. Kubera originally planned to visit Taiwan this past February, but died abruptly in late January. In an interview with Czech television, Kubera's wife Vera said 3 days before his death, they were both invited to the Chinese embassy in the Czech Republic for a New Year's dinner. The ambassador requested a private conversation with Kubera. His wife said he appeared nervous and angry after the conversation. He also asked his wife to not eat anything provided by the embassy. Vera said Kubera is usually cheerful and talkative, but days before his death, he became more silent. Vera later found 2 letters when sorting through Kubera's belongings, one from the office of the president, the other from the Chinese embassy in the Czech Republic. Vera said both letters threatened Kubera not to visit Taiwan. She blamed her husband's death on pressure from Chinese and Czech authorities. Mike Pompeo today speaking about why the U.S. wants to reassess its relationship with China. The Secretary of State saying free societies will pull through with the solutions that this virus crisis requires.
U.S. Secretary of State explaining why the nation's rethinking its relationship with China. In light of the virus, the most recent alarm waking the world to its threats.
Chinese Communist Party tells us they want to be our partners, they want to be transparent. We need partners we can rely on. That when they tell us something, it is accurate and that we don't think they're hiding anything.
Pompeo says the State Department's mission is to protect the American people, even in the face of false accusations from China's state-backed media, which claim the U.S. peddled conspiracy theories about the virus.
You suggested that the Chinese MFA and CGTN and other Chinese media outlets are saying the same thing. I'll leave it at that. Suffice it to say is that when countries engage in disinformation, it creates risk.
Noting the world is still blocked from investigating China's Virology Institute, impeding efforts around the world to put an end to future pandemics.
There are multiple labs that are continuing to conduct work, we think, on contagious pathogens inside of China today, and we don't know if they are operating at a level of security to prevent this from happening again. Remember, this isn't the first time that we've had a virus come out of China.
He says the decision to withhold funding from the WHO is based on observing how much the Chinese regime influenced its handling of the pandemic and the devastation that's caused.
The solution to this crisis will come from freedom-loving people around the world. I'm very confident of that. Authoritarian regimes are poorly designed to deal with the kind of crisis that this pandemic has engendered.
Saying it's times like these when the true benefits of a free society shine through, when people can think for themselves and assess potential solutions. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Reports say the White House is launching an investigation into the World Health Organization and the Chinese Communist Party. It allegedly told federal intelligence agencies to investigate a potential cover-up of the virus outbreak in its early stages.
And they should have been in there early. They should have known what was going on, and they should have been able to stop it at
The National Security Agency and Defense Intelligence Agency has reportedly received a tasking order from President Trump. That's according to an NBC report on Wednesday. The directive requires the agencies to find out how much the WHO knew about research labs in Wuhan that study infectious disease, including coronaviruses.
Either they didn't know or they didn't tell us, or, right now they're literally a pipe organ for China.
The WHO says the virus came from a local seafood market, but suspicions have been circulating among analysts that the virus may have leaked from the nearby Wuhan Institute of Virology. The two federal agencies were reportedly asked by Trump to compile data on the outbreak from various sources, such as communications intercepts, satellite imagery, human sources, and other means. President Trump has told reporters that the U.S. is doing very serious investigations into how the outbreak began. He added on Wednesday that his administration is coming up with a recommendation, but for now he has not confirmed the order.
Senator Ted Cruz is working to stop movie companies from censoring their films in China. It's part of his plan to target the Chinese Communist Party's information warfare. NTD's Kevin Hogan has more.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz plans to propose a bill that would send a wake-up call to Hollywood. It would take away resources from movie companies who self-censor their films in order to sell them in China. The Script Act blocks the Department of Defense, or DoD, from helping these movie makers accurately paint the picture of military stories. Fordham University media professor Paul Levinson agrees with the bill. He says it goes against democratic principles for the DoD to help filmmakers who allow the Chinese regime to censor their films just so they can tap into the Chinese market.
The last thing we want as a democracy is to make it easier for a totalitarian, non-democratic society like China to basically splice up our movies and alter the story of the movie that the makers of the movie wanted to tell.
The Script Act targets information warfare from the Chinese Communist Party across higher education, sports, film, and radio broadcasts. Critics have accused Hollywood and the U.S. Navy of giving in to the Chinese regime's censorship. In the original 1986 film Top Gun starring Tom Cruise, Maverick flaunts a leather bomber jacket with a patch showing the Taiwanese flag. But in the trailer to the 2020 sequel, we see the same jacket but with no Taiwanese flag. According to Spy Culture podcast producer Tom Secker, they did that in order to get into the Chinese market. Professor Levinson explains why the Chinese Communist regime is censoring movies to begin with.
Because they're totalitarian thinkers, meaning in a totalitarian society, the assumption is the people in power know best. They know what's best for the people. And they see it as their responsibility in order to keep people happy and peaceful and not aggravated to regulate the information that they get.
Levinson says the bill can be amended or broken up into pieces after it's introduced. He suspects most senators and congresspeople will agree with at least one part of the bill, the one that discourages American filmmakers from catering to the Chinese regime's tastes. NTD News, Kevin Hogan reporting.
And Amazon has bought temperature-checking cameras. Their source, a Chinese firm blacklisted by the U.S. for their involvement in mass detention of Chinese minorities.
Amazon has bought cameras to take temperatures of their workers. The cameras come from a Chinese firm that was blacklisted by United States. The firm allegedly helped China detain and monitor Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. Zhejiang Dahua Technology shipped 1,500 cameras to Amazon this month in a deal valued close to $10 million. The Amazon purchase is legal because rules restrict U.S. government contracts but do not stop sales from China to the private sector. Dahua cameras use face detection technology to track subjects walking by. An additional recording device keeps snapshots of faces and their temperatures. U.S. authorities were worried that equipment makers like Dahua could hide a technical backdoor to Chinese government agents seeking intelligence. The Trump administration placed Dahua and 7 other tech firms last year on the blacklist for acting against U.S. foreign policy interests, saying they were implicated in China's campaign of surveillance, detention, and repression against certain minorities. These include Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other members of Muslim minority groups. According to a United Nations estimate, more than 1 million people have been detained in camps in China's western region.
Americans are pushing back against stay-at-home extensions in multiple states. Protests, yes, but now more are taking it to the courts. Nearly 50,000 more Americans testing positive since Monday, but the top hotspots have not significantly increased in recent weeks.
Governors are feeling the heat from residents who say their extended stay-at-home orders are unwarranted. Michigan's governor now facing a second lawsuit over her stay-at-home extension. The lawsuit, filed by 5 Michigan businesses, say the governor and the state health director have placed 10 million people on house arrest and taken their jobs away without due process of law. Elsewhere, an Illinois state representative previously filed a lawsuit against their governor, which the rep won.
While the court's order is limited, the risk it poses is significant.
The governor says the state is appealing the court order immediately. In California, Governor Newsom's proposal to close beaches was turned down by the city council. And grassroots protests in North Carolina led to some participants' arrests, some of which were released the same day. The nation now has more than 1 million CCP virus cases, but the hardest-hit states are seeing good signs and planning for reopening. New York continues to see fewer cases per day than before.
We're now on average about 30,000 tests per day.
And the number of hospitalizations flatlining in recent days, with over 23,000 New Yorkers lost to the CCP virus. New Jersey is right behind New York in number of cases and has seen a slight drop in hospitalizations.
There were 426 new hospitalizations yesterday, and the trend line continues to point in the right direction.
And Massachusetts has close to 4,000 CCP virus patients in the hospital. That number plateaued over the past 2 weeks. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the next virus relief bill will need liability protections for businesses if it wants to pass the Senate.
Majority Leader.
McConnell said Tuesday the next relief bill must include liability protections for businesses or it won't pass the Senate. And that also applies to bills seeking further aid for states and cities. He said it's crucial for reopening the economy. The protections could encourage more businesses to open, businesses that might otherwise worry about legal problems related to the virus spread. Democrats have pushed for more aid for state and local governments. McConnell said he was open to it, but that only liability protections would allow it to pass the Senate. Governors nationwide criticized the lack of state and local funding in previous relief bills. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi dismissed some of those concerns, saying it's coming soon. The most recent relief bill, at almost $500 billion, includes funding for small businesses, hospitals, and virus testing, but nothing for governments. This was added to the $2.2 trillion package passed in March by Congress. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer disagrees with liability protection, saying it's a means to put barriers on state and local funding. He says employers should still be liable for not keeping CCP virus prevention measures in place. Pelosi also sees liability protection as putting workers who want to stay healthy at a disadvantage.
The Federal Reserve says economic data for the second quarter will be as bad as anyone has seen, but it's ready to help as much as possible. This includes keeping interest rates near 0% until things have improved.
The Federal Reserve says more government spending will be needed to ensure the economy can recover quickly once the pandemic is over. GDP fell by almost 5% in the first 3 months of the year, the biggest drop since the Great Depression, and the Fed's chairman says the second quarter will be as bad as anyone has seen.
While many standard economic statistics have yet to catch up with the reality we're experiencing, it's clear that the effects of on the economy are severe.
He says it's hard to predict when things will pick up again. He suggested that maybe by the second half of the year, but it will depend on the virus being brought under control.
The severity of the downturn will also depend on the policy actions taken at all levels of government to cushion the blow and to support the recovery when the public health crisis passes.
The Fed will help by keeping interest rates at 0% until the economy is on track to maximum employment. This will make it easier for people to borrow money, thus stimulating the economy.
Without access to credit, families can be forced to cut back on necessities and could lose their homes. Businesses can be forced to downsize or close, resulting in further losses of jobs and incomes and worsening the downturn.
Powell says the Fed's actions up until now have had a positive effect, so it's been able to slow the pace of some of its measures.
Boeing is set to cut 10% of its workforce. E-cigarette maker Juul will cut a third of its staff, and more in business news.
Boeing says it will cut its workforce by about 10%, further reduce 787 Dreamliner production, and try to boost liquidity as it prepares for the industry to recover, which could take years. The CCP virus pandemic drove the plane maker to a net loss for the second straight quarter. Juul is planning to cut around a third of its staff. The e-cigarette maker faces a relentless series of regulatory headaches and falling market share. The cuts translate into between 800 and 950 people. They are part of a broader restructuring plan and are not related to the virus pandemic. Health insurance provider Anthem says the CCP virus pandemic could push more people into Medicaid or Obamacare health plans due to job losses across industries. Employer-sponsored health plans like Anthem are more lucrative for insurance companies. A drop in enrollments could hammer their profits and squeeze margins. Swiss wealth manager Falcon Private Bank says it's considering withdrawing from private banking. There are reports the bank could lose its Swiss banking license by the end of the week, in part due to its involvement in a political scandal in Malaysia. Swiss financial authorities say they want to pull its license because it hasn't been complying with regulations.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is calling out a range of stakeholders, including the WHO, CDC, and even the mainstream media. He's asking why we weren't made aware of the virus threat earlier.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo on Tuesday blamed international and domestic agencies, as well as legacy media.
But where was the whole international health community? Where was the whole national host of experts, the WHO, the NIH, the CDC, that whole alphabet soup of agencies?
Cuomo expressed amazement at the apparent negligence of authorities to recognize and raise the alarm when the CCP virus first broke out in China.
Where was everyone? Where was the intelligence community with the briefings saying this is in China? And they have something called an airplane, and you can get on an airplane and you can come to the United States.
He said the primary responsibility did not lie with the states, and asked why the New York Times and Wall Street Journal didn't report on the dangers of the virus spreading, saying, "Where are all the bugle blowers?" Cuomo said valuable time was lost in January and February due to a lack of clear guidance. In comments last week, the governor supported President Trump's decision to investigate the WHO for its part in passing on misleading information about the virus. At an April 24th briefing, Cuomo said he's right to ask the question because this was too little, too late.
The Spanish Prime Minister announces the country's plan to lift the lockdown. And in France, measures will ease up soon, but protective gear will still be required.
Spain announcing a four-phase plan to lift lockdown measures. The loosening will begin on May 4th. The aim is to be back to normal at the end of June. In a town in northern France, 2 vending machines selling protective equipment are set up. France is looking at easing the lockdown, but people will still have to wear face masks on public transport and in schools and workplaces where social distancing is not possible. And Greece is looking to welcome tourists in July. The country relies heavily on the tourism sector and plans to open beaches under social distancing guidelines. And Belgium is the world's largest exporter of frozen potato products. But with potatoes now piling up due to low demand, the people of Belgium are urged to eat more fries themselves to avoid food waste. As of April 20th, there are 33 countries that have not reported a single case of the virus. These are mostly small island nations.
The Australian Prime Minister is defending his calls for an independent investigation into the virus outbreak. His remarks come after China threatened retaliation if he pursued it. Australia has doubled down on its calls for an independent investigation into the outbreak of the CCP virus. Prime Minister Scott Morrison saying it's a reasonable course of action.
I find Australia's position to be not remarkable at all, but one that is entirely responsible, and I'm sure is broadly seen in that light around the world.
Morrison says the investigation wouldn't be targeted at any particular country, but China has leapt to block its attempts. It's threatened to stop buying Australian meat and stop sending Chinese students to Australian universities, moves that would cost the Australian economy billions of dollars. But the threats don't seem to have moved Morrison.
This is a virus that has taken more than 200,000 lives across the world. It has shut down the global economy. The implications and impacts of this are extraordinary.
The Prime Minister saying it's important the world learn a lesson and stop it from happening again. If you want to party during social distancing, you have to get creative. Here's what one neighborhood in Switzerland is doing to keep spirits high.
Residents in Geneva are singing and dancing the virus blues away. Every day they choose one person to conduct the ceremonies. The MC gets to pick the songs, dances or games. Today's MC says the events have brought the neighborhood closer together.
For sure, we did not know the names of all the residents before this great adventure. For 44 days now, we have introduced every person picked up to be the MC for the evening. We have gone from residents, neighbors, to one big family.
Dancing and singing to It's Raining Men is certainly a good way to take your mind off things. One resident says it helps her forget the grim news reports.
There is music, across the street there is rock and roll. It's swinging. It feels good, it takes our mind off things. Otherwise, if you look at the news, it's very exhausting.
They plan to keep it going until schools reopen. Switzerland started easing lockdown restrictions on Monday. Most shops, schools and markets will start reopening on May 11th. Over 1,300 people in Switzerland have died from the virus.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to subscribe for the latest updates and see you tomorrow.